Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the invitation and for including me in this promising project. I'm thrilled to be among you. As Professor Medov mentioned earlier, positionality is crucial in humanities. So I'm Emna Sfaihi. I'm pursuing a PhD at the University of Debrecen in comparative literature in Hungary, but I'm from the global south. I'm from Tunisia, and my mom was disabled. Today I'm going to address disability and precarity and social change in the novel of G.M. Coetzee. Okay. So how can I help you versus what can I do for you? In the first, there is a hierarchical structure. In how I help you, it means that one is helpless, powerless, while the other is helpful and resourceful. In this presentation, I will introduce the methodological framework, then move to the analysis of the novel as a form of tourist volunteering, i.e. the deception and misunderstanding of the self and the other, and talk about social change, how to redeem the self and care for the other at the same time. Then move to the major results. So G.M. Coetzee is a South African Nobel Prize winner, and the novel Age of Iron is written during the apex of the apartheid regime, a repressive and political regime based on segregation and discrimination. In G.M. Coetzee's narrative, Mrs. Curran is a caregiver. She is a scholar, a white female, middle-aged woman, and she is in position of power. She is a white woman in a country ruled by white colonizers. Whereas Mr. Verker is the care receiver, he is a black, alcoholic, and disabled. In this encounter between Mrs. Karen and Mr. Verker, this discrimination is marked by power discrepancy. In an attempt to stand against the injustice, she decides to take care of the harmless black Mr. Verker. So before that, I would like to provide Judith Butler's definition of precarity. According to Judith Butler, precarity is a politically induced condition in which certain populations suffer from failing social and economic networks of support and become differentially exposed to injury, violence, and death. And as a derelict and disabled, Verker is in a precarious situation. The allowance he receives from the government does not cover the living expenses, and as a result, he is homeless. Mr. Karen steps in to help, and here I also have to the care is has no particular definition. I will rely on Benedict Fischer and John Toronto's definition of care. Care on the most general level, we suggest that caring must be viewed as a species activity that includes everything that we do to maintain, continue, and repair our world, so we can live in it as well as possible. That word includes our bodies, ourselves, and our environments, all of which we seek to interweave in a complex, life-sustainable or sustaining web. And there are also 4 elements of care. Attentiveness, since care requires the recognition of a need and that there is a need that can be to be cared about. If we are not attentive to the needs of others, then we cannot possibly address their needs. Responsibility is the second dimension of care. Responsibility is a term that is embedded in a set of implicit cultural practices rather than in a set of formal rules or series of promises. Ultimately, responsibility to care might rest on a number of factors. Something we did or did not do has contributed to the needs for care, and we must care. Competence, the third term that is embedded, the third phase of care, is intended to provide care, even accepting the responsibility for it, but then failing to provide good care means that in the end, the needs for the care is not met. So responsiveness is as important moral quality in caring. And responsiveness suggests a different way to understand the needs of others rather than to put ourselves in their positions. Instead, it suggests that we consider the other's position as that other expresses it. Thus, one is engaged in care from the standpoint of the other, but not simply by presuming that the other is exactly the same. And responsiveness is different from reciprocity. And here, it's linked to affect. It is like being empathetic to the person rather than being sympathetic to them. And for this, we achieve good care. In the sense, good care requires that the 4 phases of care process must fit together into a whole. Similarly, to act properly in accordance with ethics of care requires that the 4 moral elements of care, attentiveness, responsibility, competence, and responsiveness, be integrated into one whole. In my analysis, I will focus on the 4th element as I consider it missing in the cog of the chain of care. I also relies on D'Emilia's critique of tourist volunteering. And here I will provide D'Emilia's definition of tourist volunteering. The phenomenon brings to light the slippage between addressing corporeal vulnerabilities of transitionally based cared for and addressing their precarities, that is, the politically motivated insecurities framing the experience of vulnerabilities. Failures in addressing such precarities in these instances of cross-border caring helps focus on whether care can at all respond to complicated inequalities caused by colonization and oppressive histories between nations. And though living in the same country, Mrs. Karen's care for the derelict worker can fit within the limits notion of volunteering tourism, as the 2 characters come from 2 different backgrounds, where histories of oppression and colonization is at the core of their encounters. The story is set in South Africa during the apex of the apartheid regime. Moreover, Mr. Karen does not think of Verkeu as her people. I quote her, "Do you have people?" A curious expression, to have people. "Are you my people? I think you are not." In Mrs. Karen's encounter with the black alcoholic, Mrs. Karen is temporarily physically impaired due to the development of cancer, and Verkeu comes to help her. At first sight, we may think of this encounter in the sense of what Levinas terms as the ethic case, the ethically obligating case, in the sense that the vulnerability and defenselessness revealed in another person's face produce an absolute primordial obligation on the part of the subject to see the pain, the distress, the vulnerability in the eyes of the other is in a certain way to sense and perceive oneself. And in this sense, Mrs. Karen, who is in the final stage of cancer, can be seen as in a way connected to the derelict and the homeless and Verkeu, because in a way they share, or they almost share this, let's say, the same vulnerability. But I must mention that contrary to Verkeu, Mrs. Karen is not in a precarious situation because she is sustained by the system. She is white, and she is cared for by the hospital and the institutions, whereas Verkeu is let down by the system, and he is actually homeless. So, and here in the age of iron, Mrs. Karen comments, "When a ragged stranger comes knocking at the door, he is never anything but a derelict, an alcoholic, a lost soul. So yet how in our house we long for the sedate homes of ours to tremble, as in the story with angelic characters." But it is only after having a first-hand experience of the Civil War and coming face to face with Becky's death that her vision alters. I here open a parenthesis to sketch Becky. Becky is Florence's son, the black maid and care workers who looks after Mrs. Karen's house. Becky joined the armed resistance against the oppressive apartheid regime and died bleeding in front of Mrs. Karen. After this incident, the latter acquires what Foucault terms as the art of the self. It is the development of an art of existence that revolves around the question of the self, of its dependence and independence, of its universal form, and of the connection it can and should establish with the others. While attending to the wounds of Becky's friend John, she comments, "Who is he to me that I should knock him? Yet I had closed his open flesh, staunched the flows of his blood." Mr. Karen in this scene is no longer a tourist who looks as a foreigner, seeking to wrench a story out of the experience and get it enriched by helping the needy other. She attends John's wound without inspiring to be considered as a mother or claiming any kind of intimacy. She here keeps an ethical distance. By ethical, I mean respecting the other's boundary and not attempting to trespass it in the name of humanitarian actions. Mr. Karen evinces an acute sense of self-awareness and respect of the other. She also becomes morally engaged and responsible. This is illustrated in her perception of the disease, knowing at her decaying body the cancer she is suffering from. I quote her, "You know I'm sick. Do you know what is wrong with me? I have cancer. I have cancer from the accumulation of shame I have endured in my life. This is how cancer comes about, from self-loathing the body, turns into malignant and begins to eat at itself." So here she moves from being self-centered and perceiving her disease as personal and biological into perceiving it as social and reflecting the problem in South Africa. And here we move from self-centered and egocentric perception of the self to the other directed and non-self-interested character of the work. In a sense, it is generalized and systematic knowledge, and it is rather an orientation toward the community interest rather than the self-interest, and the internalization of the codes of ethics promoted by volunteering association organized and operated by the work specialists themselves, and rewards, monetary or honorary, that serve as a set of symbols of work, achievement, and thus ends in themselves, not means to some end of individual self-interest. I quote from Barber, 1899. "So, what I want to see," she said Verkel, "I want to see you as you really are." Diffidently he shrugged. "Who I am, just a man who comes without being invited." And here you can see the other in a whole and not fragmented and not from different, like from the or Eurocentric perspective. And now, like finally, I will. So, caring can be politically transformative if it is an empathetic and not sympathetic moment that triggers such entangled subjectivity. For us to care, we have to meet the four elements: attentivity, responsibility, competence, and responsiveness. And the question would be, instead of what can we do for you, is what can we do to help each other, to address the injustice of the economic neoliberal system, to see precarity as universal and not related to the global south or the global north, and think of solidarity as a solution in the face of precarity. Thank you for your listening, and this is the work list.